Take a breath. Get comfortable tonight. We're unlocking a forgotten drawer in history's quiet cabinet. You might not know what's inside, but I promise it hums with stories. Stories that don't make it into grand chronicles or glorious tapestries, but ones stitched into the straw of a peasant woman's bed. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up before the sun remembers to rise. The air is still dark, still cold, and still full of smoke from a fire that never quite dies, just sulks in embers beneath yesterday's ash. Your throat tastes like soot. Your eyes sting. And your back. Well, your back says it would rather sleep another week. But the day doesn't care. You shift under your rough wool blanket, itchy, scratchy, and exactly the opposite of luxurious. Beneath you, the mattress is not really a mattress at all. Just old sacks stuffed with straw. And if you're being honest, probably a few things that once crawled and now crunch. You sit up slowly. Your bones creak because straw offers little sympathy to weary joints. You're not old, but your body feels older than it should, aged by damp winters, hard labor, and the constant rhythm of bending, lifting, kneeling. Always kneeling. Always rising again. Your breath hangs in front of you, a little cloud in the chill. That tells you everything you need to know about how this day will go cold in the morning, colder by night, with just enough warmth in the middle to make you wish for more. Still, you don't groan. Not out loud. What's the point? The family is still asleep. You can hear them, all of them. The snore of your husband, steady, oblivious. The soft breathing of children curled beside each other like kittens. One of them mumbles something in a dream. You smile just a little before slipping your feet into shoes that are more patch than leather. Shoes never dry in winter. You get used to the feeling of damp soles. You even forget to mind the smell. You step carefully around the low ceiling beam that has caught your forehead more than once. The floor creaks. Everything creaks in this house. Walls, wood joints your patience. There's no lantern to light, just the pale silver of dawn slipping in through the cracks in the wall. But you know this room by memory. You've slept here for years. Or rather, you've half slept, half listened for the baby's cry, the drip of the roof, the neighbor's drunken shout outside. This is where your days begin. And while no bell tolls for you, you know the toll all the same. Not in chimes, but in habits. First, you check the hearth. There's hope beneath the ashes. That's what you're looking for, those tiny orange coals that survived the night hidden under yesterday's charcoal. You blow gently, then again. Sparks flicker. You feed them a twist of dry straw, stolen from the floor, where it won't be missed. If you're lucky, the flame wakes. If not, you'll need to try the flint. And that's a whole process, one that eats up time and patience in equal measure. You'd think after 1,000 years, someone would have invented a better way to light a fire. But here you are, rubbing rock to steel like it's a spell. Once the fire wakes, you feed it bits of broken twigs from the kindling basket meticulously collected weeks ago and already halfway gone. A pot of water hangs over the fire on a hook, and you hope there's enough left in the bucket to make it boil. Water doesn't come from taps. It comes from your back, from your arms, from the long walk to the stream or the well. That walk is for later. Right now, you ration what's left. You open the shutter just a crack. Morning light edges in, not bright, but enough to show the truth of the room, soot on the ceiling, smoke on the walls, and dust in corners no broom dares to chase. A hen clucks from outside. You hear her hop from the roost to the muddy ground. She's impatient for scraps. And you, well, you're just beginning. You tie a cloth around your head to keep the soot from your hair. You never see yourself? Not really. There's no mirror here. Maybe a polished bit of metal if you're lucky. But you know your reflection better from the faces of others, the way they glance when you're tired or stained or swollen from the cold. You're not vain. There's no room for vanity when survival is your main concern. But sometimes you miss the feel of a comb through clean hair, the softness of a bath, the rare luxury of feeling human. Now, the fire crackles, the warmth spreads. The others will wake soon. They'll expect food. They'll expect clothes. They'll expect the day to be ready for them. And it's your job to make it so. That's the quiet contract of your life you carry the day before it even begins. A historical truth worth noting: most peasant women in medieval Europe worked more hours than anyone else in the household. Not always at the plow or in the fields, but in the 100 invisible tasks that stitched one day to the next. And here's a quirky detail: some straw mattresses were shared with livestock during the coldest nights. You might not mind sharing a bed with your child, but a goat, that takes commitment. Now here's something scholars still debate: were medieval peasant women's lives one long struggle? Or did they find joy in the small things? Was it only toil? Or was there pride in survival? You might not have time to answer, but your life poses the question. Because even here, even now, with your knees sore and your eyes burning from smoke, you feel something stirring. Maybe it's resilience. Maybe it's habit. Maybe it's just that no one else is going to do it if you don't. The straw crunches beneath your feet as you begin again. The day is waiting. And so are you. There's a moment right after the first crackle, before the full flame, where it feels like the fire might actually decide not to show up today. You're crouched at the hearth again, your knees complaining, your breath steady as you coax a few reluctant sparks to life. You whisper encouragement to the twigs like they're moody hens refusing to lay. Come on now, just a little flame, just a little warmth, just a little reason to believe this morning won't be so awful after all. In truth, starting a fire in a medieval peasant household is part skill, part superstition, and a whole lot of persistence. If the saints are listening, especially Saint Bridget, who tends to women and hearths, you hope she's in a generous mood. The flint is worn. The striker is dull. The dry moss you stored last summer is a little damper than it should be. But you strike anyway. Again. Again. Tiny sparks jump. A curl of smoke. You hold your breath. Then, yes, the smallest ember catches on the edge of char cloth you made by accident last summer when a shirt sleeve touched the coals. You treat that ember like a newborn cup. It gently blow, carefully, and feed it with all the reverence of someone who knows that without fire, nothing else matters. The fire comes to life slowly, like a bear yawning from hibernation. It stretches crackles, and then at last sighs into flame. Congratulations! You're now officially more successful than half your neighbors who woke up to a dead hearth and a husband blaming them for it. The medieval kitchen isn't really a kitchen. It's just the corner of the one-room house where smoke is allowed to linger and wood is allowed to burn. The chimney is more wish than structure. Most of the smoke just curls around your head, then leaks through holes in the thatch or out the open door. Your lungs adjust. They always do. Now comes the ritual of setting the pot. You fill the iron cauldron with whatever water's left from yesterday. No one really knows what's floating in there. It's better not to ask. The fire licks the base of the pot, and you watch as steam begins to rise, curling like incense from a prayer. You add oats, a bit of dried onion. If it's a lucky day, leftover bone from the market, something to make the broth remember it once had flavor. You stir with a wooden spoon, its handle worn smooth from years of the same motion. It's part wand, part weapon, part peace offering. You think sometimes that fire is the one thing in this life that listens? It responds to care. It glows when fed. It dies when ignored. People, on the other hand, not quite as dependable. You look around the room. The children are stirring now. One coughs. Another rolls over and mutters something about cheese. Your husband is awake, blinking into the smoke with all the enthusiasm of a cat dropped in a puddle. He says nothing. That's fine. You weren't looking for conversation. Not yet. Fire does more than cook. It dries socks. It warms hands. It keeps death at bay, just barely. That's not poetic exaggeration. In winter, when frost creeps through the floorboards and sleep becomes shivering, the hearth is your only line of defense. Without it, your children's breath could fade into silence. There's a historical fact for you. In many medieval households, especially poorer ones, the fire was never supposed to go out. A dead hearth was a bad omen, a sign of disorder, even moral failure. If the fire died, what else in the household was slipping? So you tend it like a secret, quietly, carefully, and always, before anyone notices it's dying. Here's a quirky detail. Some women carried live embers wrapped in moss or dung just to start fires in neighbors' homes or at the bake oven. A small, smoldering bundle tucked in an apron, fold like carrying lightning in your pocket. You haven't done that lately, but the memory makes you smile. The stew starts to bubble. The smell is humble, earthy. Nothing anyone would call delicious, but it's warm. It's real. It will fill stomachs just enough to stop the complaints for an hour or two. You ladle out bowls, one for your husband first, then the children, then yourself. It's not generosity, it's habit. Order matters. Even when you're the one who stirred the pot for an hour, you eat last and you eat quickly. The day is only beginning, and the fire still needs tending. Ash must be cleared. Coals must be banked. You've learned to build heat like you build a life, slowly and with attention. You press a piece of bread into the side of the bowl to catch the last of the broth. Nothing is wasted here. Not crumbs. Not time. Not energy. Outside, the frost on the ground is melting. The sun has finally made its lazy way above the horizon, yawning over fields still stiff with winter. You'll need to go out soon, fetch more water, check on the hens, see if the neighbor's goose is still trespassing through your fence. But for now, you sit a moment near the fire. Just a moment. That's all you get. It's warm on your face. Your feet are still cold. But the contrast is a kind of luxury. Scholars still debate whether medieval peasants really dreaded winter. or if they found ways to welcome it, less field work, more time near the hearth stories told in smoke. But that debate always seems to miss something. You don't dread winter. You dread running out of wood before it ends. The fire sputters. You poke it back to life with the iron rod, muttering something like a blessing, or maybe a threat. It listens. At least something does. The fire still crackles behind you, but it's time to move. Warmth is a fleeting friend in your world. It never stays, and it always asks for something in return, like walking to the well, with a bucket, on a path that can only be described as one long excuse to sprain an ankle. The bucket is wooden iron banded and heavier empty than it has any right to be. It bangs against your knee as you walk, not rhythmically, but resentfully, as if reminding you who's really in charge. Outside, the morning is damp. Not quite rain, but not dry either. The sort of wetness that creeps into your clothes and makes everything smell like wet sheep. You pass your own henhouse empty, except for one brooding chicken and the smell of future dinners. You're not alone on the path, of course. The well is a social hub, or a battlefield depending on who's there first. Your feet sink into mud as you walk. Medieval paths are rarely paved unless a king's horse might ride down them, and yours is not one of those roads. The grass is slick, the soil is soft, and frogs, yes frogs, seem to have declared dominion over the puddles. You step over one, narrowly avoiding a squish. It blinks at you, as if to say, "We were here first." At the bend near the blackberry bush, you hear the voices. Women's voices. Not angry, not loud, but sharp in their own way. Like paring knives. Peeling gossip down to its core. You brace yourself. The well is just ahead. It's not that you hate the other women. You don't. You depend on them. But the well is where reputations go to drown. If someone's husband wandered off last week, or if a child came back from the woods with a new scar, or if bread rose funny in someone's oven, it'll be dissected here between pulls of the rope and clunks of the bucket. You round the hedge. There they are. Giselle arms, folded eyes scanning like a bailiff at market. Marga, already mid-sentence, holding a pail like it's a prop in a morality play. And little Annette, who's barely 16 and tries to giggle at the right times. They see you. You nod, smile, neutral. "Morning," says Giselle. You answer with just enough tone to imply civility and just little enough to suggest you're tired, which of course you are. You wait your turn at the well. The rope is frayed. The pulley creaks. You think, as you always do, how ridiculous it is that the most crucial piece of village infrastructure rests on one rusted wheel and hope. Marga tugs up her bucket and says something about Mistress Johanne's goats escaping again. You nod, though you don't really care about the goats. It's a skill appearing interested while cataloging how much water you'll need to scrub the children's feet later, whether there's time to soak laundry before midday, and how many beans you'll trade at market. You lower your bucket. The rope winds. The bucket sinks with a familiar thunk. You feel it settle deep into the well, like a truth you'd rather not face. When you pull it up, it's heavier than expected. A good draw. Of course, now you must carry it back. This is the part no one romanticizes. You see water is heavy. Almost 9 pounds per gallon, though no one in your century uses that number. You just know it, by the way your spine compresses and your arms stretch like taffy. The bucket sloshes. Cold trickles down your dress. You keep walking, Here's a historical fact for you. In many parts of medieval Europe, women and girls walked several kilometers a day just to haul water. It was unpaid labor, invisible labor, and essential labor. It kept life functioning, but earned no praise. And here's the quirky bit. Some women would balance water jugs on their heads using folded cloth rings. You've tried it once. Badly. You still have the bruise from where it toppled. You pass the edge of the woods on the way back. The trees are dense this season, thick with the kind of shade that feels like it's watching you. There's a superstition: don't turn your back on the trees. Spirits live there, or wolves, or worse, men with no good reason to be hiding. You hurry. By the time your cottage is in sight, your fingers are red and your shoulder burns, but you've managed not to spill much. A small victory. Inside, the fire has mellowed. The children are bickering softly over who gets the less cracked spoon. You set the bucket down like it's made of gold. No one thanks you. No one notices. That's part of the job. You ladle some water into the basin for hand washing. You'll use some to soak lentils, some to rinse fabric, and some, if you remember, for your own face. The well water smells faintly of iron and frogs, but it's cold. Clean enough. It does the job. Now here's the scholarly debate. Was medieval water actually dangerous? Popular myth says it was all beer and wine because water was filthy. But many historians argue that people did drink water regularly, especially in rural areas like yours, because they had to. Streams, wells, springs. They were lifelines. And boiling water wasn't a rare act of genius. It was common kitchen sense. Still, you're careful. You glance down at your bucket and catch your reflection, a distorted version of yourself, rippled and unsure. You smile at it anyway. You're not looking for glamour. You're looking for survival. The frogs are croaking again, somewhere near the fence post. You sigh. Another trip will be needed before dusk. And the bucket never gets any lighter. The fire has calmed down to a dependable orange glow, and now it's time to face the cauldron, the loyal but temperamental beast that defines your mornings. You lift the lid. Steam rises, slowly, lazily, like even it can't be bothered to get up today. Inside, the same thing greets you as it did yesterday, and the day before, and probably the day before that, a thick, lumpy porridge. Oats barley, maybe a tired carrot if you're lucky. You give it a stir. The wooden spoon drags through it like it's moving through wet clay. Somewhere behind you, a child coughs. You're not a chef. You're a chemist, a juggler, and a magician trying to make something edible out of not quite enough. And you do this every single day, on instinct, without praise. A splash of water from your earlier trip. A pinch of salt if you've got it. A dash of dried herbs if you don't. If the wind is blowing the right way, maybe the pot will even pretend to smell appetizing. But more often than not, it just smells like wet grain and duty. Here's the funny thing. Feeding your family in the Middle Ages wasn't just about cooking. It was performance sacrifice and survival rolled into one bubbling pot. The task was invisible if you succeeded, and scandalous if you failed. A burnt edge to the porridge. Your mother-in-law will bring it up for 3 weeks. Forget the spoon and let it bubble over. Your husband will think it's a sign of bad luck. And if the neighbor's children come over and get a bigger bowl than your own, well, that's practically grounds for excommunication. You portion carefully. The children eat first. Of course they do. They're growing. Everyone says that as if you are no longer expected to grow, just endure. You ladle some into your eldest's bowl. She wrinkles her nose. I wanted the thicker part, she mutters. You don't answer. You just tilt the spoon and find a thicker scoop. You hand your husband his bowl. He doesn't look at you, just sniffs it and mutters something about more salt next time. There won't be more salt next time. Salt costs more than gossip these days. You finally sit cross-legged, your own bowl in your lap. It's not full. It never is. And just as your spoon touches the surface, a noise comes from the barn, a loud thump. The goats again. You set your bowl aside and stand. The porridge will still be there when you return. Hopefully. Inside the barn, the smallest goat has decided that today is Rebellion Day. It has kicked over the feed bucket and is currently chewing the hem of your only good apron. You chase it off with an exhausted hiss and a rustle of straw. The goat looks at you with zero guilt and a surprising amount of confidence. By the time you return to your porridge, it's gone cold. You eat it anyway. This is your fourth meal this week that's been mostly temperature disappointment and mild chewing. Here's your historical fact. In many medieval households, especially poorer ones, women often ate last. Not ceremonially, not out of religious reverence, just out of practicality. They served everyone else, ensured everything was smooth, and only then tended to themselves. It wasn't noble. It was expected. And here's your quirky detail. In some areas, women used wooden trenchers as plates, small, shallow bowls, carved from soft wood. They were rarely washed, just scraped clean, and left near the hearth where the smoke cleansed them. You've got one of those. It smells faintly of onions, and yesterday, as you scrape the last bites, you wonder about that scholar, yes, the one who claimed that medieval women were passive domestic agents. You'd love to serve him a bowl of cold porridge and see if he still thought you were passive. Sometimes you imagine inviting all the historians into your home. Let them take turns walking to the well, tending the fire, dodging goat kicks, and serving meals that never fill you. Let them write their papers with splinters in their hands and a baby on their hip. Maybe then they'd rethink the word domestic. You rinse your bowl with a few cold drops from the bucket. No soap. Just enough water to make it not visibly sticky. The children are arguing again. One says the porridge was too thin. The other says it was too hot. You say nothing. There is always something else to do. Your stomach still feels half empty. But you've learned to ignore it. Hunger is not a guest anymore. It's part of the furniture. And now it's time to wash the pot. Because of course it is. The iron cauldron is heavy and awkward, like washing a boulder. You tip it, slowly scraping out the last stubborn oat bits with your fingernail. The fire still glows beneath the stones. The smoke curls around your ankles like a lazy ghost. As you scrub, you think about that debate some scholars have. Did medieval peasants eat poorly? The answer depends on the season, the harvest, and your social standing. In bad years, people starved. In better years, you had vegetables, eggs, or maybe a piece of salted fish if the wind was in your favor. But you eat what you grow, what you can trade, what doesn't crawl away before cooking. And some days, that means porridge. Again, you rinse the pot with water that is already turning gray. Then you set it down, let it dry in the warm, soot-scented air, and glance at the hearth where it will live until you summon it again. Feeding others is not a task. It's a rhythm, one you hum without melody every morning, even when your bowl is the last to be filled, even when it's cold, even when no one says thank you. You don't put on clothes in the morning. You climb into them. Each piece feels like a chapter in a book written by someone who never had to wear wool in July. The shift goes on first linen, if you're lucky, scratchy if you're not. It's the only layer that feels vaguely human against your skin. Everything else, pure medieval challenge. Then the kirtle. That's the long dress, with no real shape, just weight. Yours has stains from the last laundry day, which was also the last rainstorm, and the stitching under one arm is threatening mutiny. You tie it tight with a woven cord that's never quite the right length. And over that, the overdress, thick, heavier, more wool, and then, of course, an apron. Because no medieval woman was allowed to be comfortable without also being prepared to scrub turnips or rescue a baby goat at a moment's notice. Somewhere beneath it all, you itch. The itching is not psychological. It's population-based. Lice are a fact of life. You call them by name. Well, not really. But you could. They've been with you longer than your second cousin. And unlike him, they don't ask for bread. Here's your historical fact. In the Middle Ages, most people had only a couple sets of clothes, if that. Laundry wasn't daily. It wasn't weekly. It was occasional. A grand event involving rivers, soapwort, and hope. More often than not, clothes were just aired out, beaten with a stick, and called good enough. You feel that truth in your bones every time you move. Everything you wear today is heavy. Every step swishes and drags like you're walking through soup. There's a reason peasants walked slowly. It wasn't grace. It was friction. You adjust the layers again. The neckline's a little too low, so you tug it up. The hem's too long, so you kick it slightly as you walk. There's no mirror. You rely on puddles for fashion advice. And your neighbor, who once told you your sleeves looked sinful. They didn't. They were just patched with red cloth. But red, apparently, is a gateway color. Here's a curious little detail. Medieval women didn't wear underwear. Not really. Not in the way you'd think. Some had loose underdrawers, mostly in later centuries. But for the average woman in your shoes, well, there are no shoes. But you get the point. You're free range under the kirtle. Modesty was more about coverage than layers beneath. You try not to think about it too much as you bend to gather laundry. Ah, laundry. The medieval regret. You've got a pile of linens that need soaking, beating, scrubbing, drying, and let's be honest, maybe apologizing to. The stains are old friends by now. That one, from a child's nosebleed last harvest. This one possibly beats. Possibly something less poetic. You take the laundry down to the stream. Of course, it's not just you. Half the village is there. Everyone with fabric and a grudge against dirt. You kneel beside the water, cold seeping into your knees, and you begin to work. Scrub. Rinse. Beat against a stone. Repeat. The sound of laundry day is rhythmic and eternal. There's chatter all around you. Mostly gossip. Who is pregnant? Who is not, but probably should be? Who has been smiling too much at the blacksmith? You listen with half an ear. The rest of your mind is trying to remember how long it's been since you last scrubbed your apron. The answer is long enough that the river winced when it touched the hem. You glance at the women beside you. They're doing the same motions, beating the same fabric, and yet somehow Their linens always seem whiter. Is that envy? Probably. But it's quiet buried beneath tired shoulders and red knuckles. Here's the debate. Historians still murmur about how clean were medieval people. Some claim peasants were filthy, living in clouds of fleas and grease. Others argue they bathed far more often than given credit for, and that cleanliness, while different from modern standards, still mattered. The truth, it's somewhere in the rinse water. You try. You do your best with what you have. A little lie, a lot of scrubbing, a prayer that your best shift won't tear this time. As you wring out the last piece, you notice a spider crawling along your sleeve. You flick it off. It returns. You flick it again. At this point, you're wondering if the spider just wants to be warm too. You haul the wet laundry back toward the cottage, your arms straining under the weight. Wet wool feels like betrayal. Your spine hums with every step. Back home, you hang the linens near the hearth, your very own indoor storm cloud dripping slowly onto the floor. You change back into your dryer kirtle, the one with the patched elbow and the whisper of lavender from last spring. And you pause, just for a moment. In the low light of your cottage, with the fire dancing and the laundry steaming, you look down at yourself. Not elegant, not fashionable, but dressed, surviving. There's something dignified in that. You tie your apron again, pull your sleeves up once more, and return to the day. Still itching, still swishing, still layered in a life no one ever wrote songs about. There's a strange truth to your life. If you do everything right, no one notices. If the roof doesn't fall in, if the chickens don't escape, if the food doesn't spoil, if the child doesn't tumble into the well, it's not because you were brilliant. It's just the way things are supposed to be. Until they're not. This morning, the stool wobbles. Just slightly. It's the one your husband built, with more enthusiasm than skill, and you've been tightening its joints with bits of cloth and leftover twine. Today, you retie the knots again. You don't mention it to anyone. No one asks. You patch the stool the way you patch everything, quickly, silently, before it becomes a crisis, because that's what most of your day is made of. Prevention. There's always a hinge that's almost splintered, a jug that's nearly cracked a roof beam, groaning like an old man in a storm. And you've become the quiet architect of not letting anything collapse. You lift the jug with both hands, testing the feel of it. Still sound. Good. But you store it sideways on a cloth anyway, just in case a hairline crack is hiding beneath the glaze. That's what your job is, noticing things no one else sees. Like the way the back gate doesn't quite latch when it rains, or how the child's cough sounds different this week, or that the flour is running low, even though no one has said anything. You keep the house from crumbling, and the family from stumbling, not with grand declarations, but with tiny invisible tasks. Here's your historical fact. Medieval women were the primary managers of the household economy. That doesn't mean coins and markets. It means food storage, repairs, inventory, fuel collection, animal care, and crisis control. The husband may have held legal ownership, but the wife was the operational core. And no one carved that into a cathedral wall. You check the basket by the hearth. A mouse has been chewing the edge again. You sigh. You turn it upside down, pat it clean, and rub the edge with a paste of ash and vinegar. It won't stop the mouse, but it might make the chew less tasty. You also make a mental note to move the food scraps farther up the wall. You've done that mental note thing a lot lately. Mental notes and actual knots, the two great tools of a medieval woman. The door creaks. You rub a little goose fat into the hinge. Not because anyone told you to, but because the sound drives you slightly mad, and your sanity is a resource worth preserving. Later, you check the thatch above the bed. It's not leaking yet, but there's a faint darkness that says soon. You poke it with the broom handle just to see if it crumbles. It doesn't. Still, you'll sleep a little more stiffly tonight, ready to relocate the blanket if the drip begins at midnight. It's always something. Your apron string is wearing thin, so you wrap it twice instead of once. The cupboard door doesn't close properly, so you wedge a folded scrap of cloth in the corner. The fence around the herb garden leans a little more each week, so you dig your heel into the dirt beside it whenever you walk past, adding pressure where nails are missing. And no one notices. They just see the fence hasn't fallen yet. You wonder, sometimes would anyone know how much you hold together if you stopped? It's a dark thought, but it passes, like most of your thoughts, replaced by the next task. Here's a curious detail. Many medieval women carried knives, not for violence, but because tools were personal. Your knife is used for cord cutting, cheese slicing, cloth trimming, feather shaving, and sometimes, yes, for nudging open a stuck lid. It hangs from your belt like a badge of quiet authority. You tighten the string on the broom again. It's not a glamorous job, keeping everything in that delicate balance between functional and falling apart. But you've come to admire it, this world of small repairs. It's a language you speak fluently, and yet here's the debate. Modern scholars still have, how much agency did medieval peasant women really have? Were they empowered through their responsibilities, or merely burdened by them? Was quiet competence a form of control, or just another layer of unpaid labor? You don't answer the question. You just fix the latch again. There's a deep comfort in being the person who knows where everything goes, how it works, and what needs to be done next. Not glamorous, but grounding. You check the firewood pile, stacked crooked but usable. You open the jar of salt, still dry, thank God. You look at the ceiling beam, just one splinter starting to hang. You make a mental note. Your whole life is made of those notes. They don't get sung in poems, embroidered on tapestries, or written into scrolls. But they hold more than the roof up. They hold you up. And when someone asks, rarely quietly, "How is everything still working?" you smile. You say, "It just does." And then you tighten the stool leg one more time, just in case. There is no such thing as a schedule. Not really. There are intentions, like I'll finish spinning this wool before mid-morning, or I'll clean the floor before someone spills something fermented on it, or the child will nap before the goat walks inside again. But these are more hopes than timetables, because the moment you begin one task, another clucks cries or crashes into your plans. Take today. You wake with your hands already half busy, gripping a woven basket full of kindling in one, and a child's sticky hand in the other. You don't remember exactly how you got there, but the child is awake, the chickens are awake, and you by default are very much awake. The child starts pointing urgently toward the fireplace. The chicken, she says solemnly, is in the oven. You blink. You look, and yes, she is, not roasted, just sitting there, proud, feathers puffed, like she's claimed it as her nesting castle. You sigh, not for the first time, not for the last. You retrieve the hen, murmuring something polite that's mostly for your own sanity. The hen flaps her annoyance. The child claps. And the goat, because, of course, there's a goat, chooses this moment to try chewing on the blanket hanging by the door. Welcome to your morning. Here's your historical fact. In a medieval peasant household, the division between indoor and outdoor life was more of a suggestion than a wall. Animals, children, elders, and work all flowed in and out of the same shared space. If you were lucky, there might be a loft or a wooden partition. If not, you learned to share your home with snoring pigs and gassy cows. You rescue the blanket from the goat, tuck it up higher. Mentally note to wash it later, though whether later means today or the next rainstorm is up for debate. The child disappears. You panic briefly, then find her beneath the table, trying to feed breadcrumbs to a wooden spoon. Baby, you say gently, that spoon's not hungry. She disagrees. You let her be, for now. You turn your attention to the laundry half dry, half dragged through the dirt by the wind. You collect what's salvageable, a sock that still smells of yesterday's stew, a shift with a hole growing near the elbow. You fold what you can. The rest becomes next time work. You never run out of next time work. The chickens follow you, not out of loyalty, but suspicion. They think you might drop food. You usually do. One pecks your boot. You pretend not to notice. You're above poultry-based arguments today. You hand the child a wooden toy, a carved horse with one missing leg. She loves it anyway. You watch her toddle across the packed dirt floor, narrating her own adventure in a mixture of babble and actual medieval curses she may have picked up from your brother-in-law. You make another mental note: stop swearing when you stub your toe. At least when she's around. Here's a curious detail. Medieval toys were often homemade little dolls of straw carts of wood animal figures, carved with love, and probably a knife that also sliced cheese that morning. Childhood was shorter, but not devoid of joy. Children played between chores, and sometimes the chores became the games. You sweep the hearth, though it's mostly just a gesture. The ash returns the moment the wind shifts. You hear a clatter in the loft. Probably a squirrel. Hopefully not a child. You make another mental note again. There's something magical and exhausting about this life. Everything moves. Everything talks. Nothing waits. You crouch to tie a sandal. The chicken perches on the table again. The child spills lentils onto the floor. The goat sneezes. You pause, breathe, and realize strangely that this chaos is your rhythm. You know where everything is you know what needs doing approximately. And you know that if you wait long enough, the worst part of the day will pass without your intervention at all. Sometimes you solve problems. Sometimes they solve themselves. Sometimes the chicken leaves the oven on her own. And here's the academic debate. Scholars still tangle with, was the medieval peasant woman's life defined more by domestic control or relentless unpredictability? Was she the queen of her domain or merely the juggler of circumstances out of her hands? You're not sure it's either. Or maybe it's both. You stir a pot of broth with one hand and rock the child's cradle with the other. She's not sleeping. You pretend she is. The afternoon sun slides in, slanted through the window. A shaft of light catches the dust dancing in the air. It's oddly peaceful, like the universe is whispering that this moment, messy, noisy, too full, and too fragile, is the real core of life. And you're in it. up to your elbows in it. You adjust the fire, add a stick, pull a stray feather from your sleeve, sit down for 30 seconds, then up again because the goat is back at the blanket. You sigh, but this time you smile a little because tomorrow the same thing will happen, and the next day. And if nothing falls over, burns down, or flies through the window, you'll count it as a win. Just another chapter in your quiet, never still, beautifully ridiculous day. You've been hungry for 3 hours, but hunger, like most things in your life, waits its turn, quietly grumpily, and usually behind 6 other problems wearing muddy shoes. You glance at the pot by the hearth. It's still porridge. Of course it is. You stirred it at dawn. You stirred it again at noon. It will taste like the morning, but warmer. That's the only difference. But you're not eating yet. Not until the others do. First, you serve your husband. He doesn't ask for that, but he also doesn't stop you. Then the children, who never seem to chew, and somehow end up with food in their hair. Then anyone else who happens to be in your home, a cousin passing through a neighbor, whose oven cracked a traveler, who smelled barley from the road and knocked. Only when everyone has something, anything, do you scrape your own portion from the bottom of the pot. It's stuck, slightly burned, but you tell yourself that's flavor. Here's your historical truth. Peasant meals were repetitive, seasonal, and communal. Food wasn't just nourishment, it was rhythm. Oats, barley beans, leeks, and cabbage, day after day. With bread when the oven worked. With meat when fortune smiled. With herbs when you dared borrow some from the hedgerow. Luxury was a warm bowl, and no one complaining. You eat quickly, not because you're rushed, but because your stomach no longer trusts leisure. The bread is dry, but thick enough to trick your jaw into thinking it's working hard. The child beside you asks for more. You give her your crust, because that's what you do. She chews it thoughtfully, like it's rare, which in a way it is. Sometimes you imagine the food you've never tasted, not just the rich pies of the Lord's table, but even spices you've heard whispered about. Cinnamon, pepper, almonds. A lemon once passed through your village, and someone described it like a small yellow moon that tasted like sunlight. You didn't believe them, but part of you wants to. Today's treat is a wild onion saved from a bunch you pulled near the edge of the woods. You slice it fine and scatter it across the porridge like it's treasure. The children wrinkle their noses. You eat theirs too. You've learned that hunger isn't always an emergency. It's more of a background hum, like the wind in the rafters or the echo in your bones. It comes. It stays. Sometimes it sings. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it sleeps. Quirky detail. Here's one. In some regions, women used to chew parsley or mint between chores, not just to freshen breath, but to quiet the stomach and avoid the smells of stew that they couldn't yet touch. It wasn't about etiquette. It was survival. And maybe a little dignity. You wash your bowl with the same cloth you use for the table, the floor, and if you're honest, your hands. Water is too precious to assign it tasks. It does everything, just like you. This is also the hour when you remember what you forgot. There was supposed to be turnips. You forgot to dig them, or rather, you meant to. But something came up. It always does. You whisper an apology to your future self and promise tomorrow you'll be better. Tomorrow, you'll remember the turnips. Tomorrow, You'll maybe bake that flatbread recipe your aunt mumbled once during childbirth. Tomorrow, there might be something else in the pot besides porridge. Tomorrow always tastes better in your head. Here comes the scholarly debate. Were peasant diets nutritionally sufficient or dangerously lacking? Some say the rhythm of grains, beans, and preserved vegetables provided a surprising balance. Others argue malnutrition was constant, especially for women who often fed others first, last, or not at all. It depends on the season. It depends on the household. It depends, like everything, on what the earth gave that year, and whether it rained too little or too much. The pot scrapes empty. The bowls are licked clean, some by tongues, some by spoons, some by hopeful dogs. You pack away what's left: 3 spoonfuls and a sliver of onion. That's tomorrow's breakfast. Or maybe tonight's if the child wakes again. You stack the bowls on a shelf too close to the hearth and hope no mouse finds them before morning. The fire is low. You add peat, not wood, because peat is slower, and you are frankly tired of things going fast. The child is now chewing a stick. You decide that's fine. You once read, or maybe heard, that hunger sharpens the mind. You don't feel sharp. You feel soft. Soft in the way porridge feels soft, like a thing meant to hold others together. Not exciting, not beautiful, but warm, necessary. You hum as you rinse the pot. Not a tune, just a sound. Something to fill the quiet and remind the shadows that you're still here. And even if dinner wasn't special, even if you burned the bottom again, even if no one said thank you, you fed the house, you did the work, and maybe that's enough. There's a broom in your hand, not because the floor needs sweeping, not because you have energy left to do it, but because someone might walk in, and it's better to look like you're sweeping than to be accused of laziness. The art of appearing busy is an ancient, unspoken craft. You've mastered it the way a spider spins a web, not out of pride, but out of sheer necessity. You lean on the broom, just slightly dragging it across the already clean floor in slow, deliberate strokes. No dust moves, but your image remains spotless. This is where exhaustion learns to dress up as diligence. The truth is, you could lie down right now. You could curl into the straw in the corner, press your face against the wall, and vanish into a dream where your hands aren't sore and your name isn't being called. But rest is a dangerous luxury. It invites judgment, murmurs, expectations. Peasant women, you've learned, do not rest. They prepare. They straighten up. They finish something that was already started. So you continue pretending. Historically speaking, this wasn't far from the truth. Medieval chroniclers often failed to note the sheer labor involved in simply being presentable. Tasks that looked like idleness to outsiders, darning socks, inspecting grain, untangling wool, were simply quieter forms of work. And for women, especially work that couldn't be seen, was work that didn't count. You sit briefly, just long enough to rub your calf with the heel of your other foot. Then someone walks by the door, and you stand again. As if summoned by the holy broom itself. The chickens watch you. They know the truth. You sweep a bit more, not because it needs it, but because your body needs the motion. Like a lullaby for your limbs. There's also the performance. Yes, performance. You've learned that certain neighbors, especially the one with the extra cheesecloth, will drop by unexpectedly. And you cannot be caught idle. No, no. That would make your name drift into the market like fog. She was just sitting when I passed. They'd whisper, as if your rest were a scandal worthy of ballads. And so you polish a spoon. You stir a pot with nothing in it. You talk to the goat like it's your apprentice. The academic question of the day: whether women in medieval peasant households were idle or always busy. The debate is moot, really, because the answer is yes to both. Women were constantly working, yes, but also constantly pretending not to rest even when they needed to. The real issue was visibility. Labor that could be seen was respected. Labor that was hidden mental load, memory anticipation, was mistaken for air. You rearrange the same 3 jars on the shelf for the 4th time today, because one of them is chipped, and it's the chipped one you always place in front so that no one can accuse you of showing off. Pride like rest is dangerous. You pull at a loose thread on your sleeve and pretend it's embroidery. It's not. But if someone asks, you'll say you're repairing. You're always repairing, yourself included. Another curious historical detail: in some manor records, women were marked as idle on certain days when no harvest or spinning was visible. What the records don't show is that these were often the days women were healing, birthing, nursing, or just surviving. Apparently, surviving didn't count on parchment. You move toward the doorway and lean on the frame as if inspecting the sky. You are. But you are also letting your shoulders rest while your eyes pretend to squint at weather signs. The sun is too bright. You go back in and adjust a curtain that doesn't really adjust, just to look occupied. You hum a hymn under your breath, not for holiness, but to time your movements. If you finish the Kyrie before sitting, you tell yourself then it's okay. You don't. You never do. Instead, you pace the room. You fix a stool that wasn't broken. You shuffle a bundle of herbs until it smells like work. And still, it doesn't stop. The child comes in and asks what you're doing. You tell them thinking, which is only half a lie. Because most of this work isn't with your hands anymore. It's in your mind, thinking about what comes next, who needs what, whether the roof is leaking behind the cupboard again, how long the dried fish will last, whether you really used up all the lard last week, and why the cat keeps hiding in the oven. It's a full-time job, just remembering what hasn't happened yet. You glance around. The place looks fine, not spotless, not perfect, but as though someone has been trying, and in this world trying counts for something. Or at least you hope it does, because you don't have energy to start sweeping for real. You lean the broom back in the corner, but not too deep into the corner, just enough so it looks like you'll return to it any moment, because someone always might walk in, and you're too tired to explain why you're tired, so you just keep appearing busy, until eventually no one is watching. And maybe you sit down, just for a second, just until the next thing needs you, which of course is already on its way. The roof is leaking again. Of course it is. It leaks when it rains. It leaks when it doesn't. It leaks when you breathe too hard in its direction. And it definitely leaks whenever someone important is visiting. Today, the sun is out, sort of. But that doesn't matter. A bead of water still drips from the same corner beam, as though the house itself has learned how to weep from memory. You stare at it for a while. Then you do what any peasant woman with dignity and sore shoulders would do. You move the bucket underneath it again and pretend that it's not personal. Thatch, they call it. A bundle of straw reeds, sticks, and good intentions. It keeps out the weather in theory. In practice, It's more of a suggestion, a polite barrier between your household and the entire sky. There's moss up there, and twine, and possibly a nest of something you refuse to acknowledge. Once you tried to patch it, climbed onto the roof with half a basket of damp straw and a prayer to whichever saint handles ceilings. You poked, you adjusted, you got stuck. Then the dog barked, you slipped, and your ankle remembered that it was no longer 12 years old. After that, you decided buckets were the better plan. Historically, many peasant homes had roofs that were thatched with what was available: wheat straw, heather bracken, sometimes even seaweed. It was cheap, renewable, and better than nothing. But it required constant tending, especially in wet seasons. And in England, France, or anywhere, with clouds and wind that meant forever. The leak today has a rhythm. Plop, pause, plop, pause, like a priest knocking at the door of your sanity. You try to ignore it, but of course it's right above the drying herbs. You move them, shuffle them to a shelf near the fire, knowing full well that too much heat will wilt them, but also knowing you're too tired to argue with gravity. The problem with leaks, you've learned, isn't just the water. It's what the water tells everyone. A leaky roof says you've neglected something. It says you're not trying hard enough. It says you're poor, which of course you are, but it's rude for the house to announce it so publicly. That's the thing about being a medieval woman. Even the building joins in judging you. You once heard the priest mumble that a leaky roof was symbolic of a leaky soul. You'd like to see him patch a ceiling with frozen fingers and a toddler on his hip. Here's the scholarly debate of the day. Did peasant homes offer real protection from the elements, or were they closer to glorified sheds? Historians differ. Some argue that with care, a thatched roof could last 15-30 years. Others note that in the dampest areas, patches were weekly chores, and even the best constructed houses still had more drafts than a castle under siege. Back to the drip. You place a second bowl beside the first, because the water is now splitting into twin streams, fickle as goats. You try stuffing a rag into the crack. It falls out. You try a thicker cloth. It soaks through. Eventually, you wedge a piece of firewood into the gap. It doesn't fix the leak, but now you've done something. And that's the real measure of effort. It's all performative, really. You catch sight of your neighbor's roof, newly repaired by her husband, who insists on announcing it at church. It gleams like smugness and dry socks. You roll your eyes so hard you almost see last summer. Another drop lands, this time on your shoulder. You wipe it without comment. Sometimes you feel like the house is crying with you, and sometimes you feel like it's laughing. The walls creak when the wind changes. The door no longer closes properly unless you wedge it with a rock. The floorboards are less boards and more creative suggestions, but it's yours. Or at least no one's evicted you yet. You know which step to skip so it doesn't squeak. You know where to put your feet in the dark so you don't trip. You know how to tell the difference between a leaking roof and a rat in the rafters by sound, not sight. And you know deep down that this roof isn't trying to ruin you. It's just tired, like you. So you sit for a moment, not to nap, never that, just to rest your back. The bowl fills slowly. You empty it outside. You don't scream. You don't cry. You don't even curse. You just set it back in place under the leak like you've done 100 times before. Like your mother did. Like her mother did. Because if the roof leaks, at least it means the walls are still standing. And in this life, sometimes that's enough. There's a certain look you give him, not the look you gave him when you first met. That one involved fluttering lashes and freshly scrubbed cheeks. No, this is the look of a woman who has scrubbed 3 chamber pots before sunrise and knows where the blunt end of the ladle is. He doesn't see it. He's too busy explaining something you already know. You nod. You smile. You don't interrupt because in this world, interrupting a man mid-rant is considered more scandalous than cows wandering into mass. Medieval marriage, you've learned, isn't about love or poetry. It's about survival and alliances and pig ownership, sometimes all 3. You didn't get much say in the match. He was a neighbor, then a husband, then most days a logistical complication you share a roof and a workload with. On feast days, he's bearable. On days when the stew burns or the chickens escape, he's louder. But he's not the only man in your life. There's the priest, who insists on discussing your soul's cleanliness, but flinches at the sight of your muddy hem. There's the reeve, who counts your chickens with suspicious intensity, but conveniently forgets your name. There's the miller who weighs your grain like he's judging your worth, and maybe he is. And then there are the men you never meet, the ones in castles or abbeys, who make decisions that somehow end up as your responsibility. You didn't vote for them. You didn't ask for them. But you carry their taxes in your apron all the same. Here's your historical fact. For the evening, medieval women were legally subject to male authority, first their fathers, then their husbands. In many places, married women couldn't own property, independently enter contracts, or speak in court without male permission. The doctrine of coverture meant your identity was quite literally covered by your husband's, which is impressive considering how often he misplaces his boots. Of course, the rules weren't always consistent. A widow might own land. A midwife might command respect. A nun might run an estate better than the lord she served. But you're somewhere in between. And that's a difficult place to be, especially when your husband tells the story of how he single-handedly repaired the barn roof while you vividly remember holding the ladder and catching the hammer 3 times. Still, you smile, because contradicting him would start a conversation you don't have energy for. You nod again when he misremembers how many turnips you planted last spring. You tilt your head just slightly when he explains once more that goats just need firm handling. You press your lips together when the neighbor's son saunters by and says something about a woman's place being by the hearth. You resist the urge to invite him to spend a day in your shoes. Or more accurately, your cracked, blistered, never quite dry clogs. There's a quiet power in patience, not the noble kind they sing about in ballads, the gritty, real kind that lets you endure 4 monologues about fence repairs without setting something on fire. Some days, your tongue is the strongest muscle in your body, not from speaking, but from biting it. And yet, here's the strange truth. For all the sighing, the explaining, the heavy-footed opinions, you don't always mind them. Sometimes, after a long day, your husband brings home a sprig of wild herbs, or helps the child find her shoes, or wants a tiny carved spoon just for you. He never mentioned why. You never asked. But it's those small, crooked gestures that keep the roof patched and the kitchen quiet, even when he snores like an ox with a cold. Academic historians still debate the extent to which women shape domestic and social life despite legal constraints. While the written records center men, the day-to-day reality suggests a more complex picture, one in which women influence decisions through negotiation, silence, and strategic hospitality. You're not powerless. You're just exhausted. So when the men talk, you listen. Not because you agree, but because you're already calculating what needs fixing after they leave. They'll talk about politics. You'll notice the soup is boiling over. They'll debate planting schedules. You'll adjust the baby's swaddling. They'll argue over how to discipline the dog. You'll feed it under the table. And at the end of the day, they'll say, "See, we keep things running." You'll smile again. Because it's easier than holding up a mirror. Because it's quieter than a lecture. Because tomorrow, you'll do it all again, plus the laundry. And because you know that sometimes the best way to deal with all the men in your life is to quietly run circles around them. You reach for the wooden spoon, not because you're cooking, though the pot does need a stir, but because the baby is crawling toward the hearth again, and this spoon has better aim than your words. You tap the flagstones with it, and the child veers off, distracted by a beetle. Crisis averted. This spoon, to be clear, is not just any spoon. It's old. The wood has darkened with smoke, and time the handle smoothed by calloused hands, mostly yours. The bowl of it is slightly chipped, stained from too many turnips, and once singed at the edge when it fell into the fire. It smells faintly of broth ash and something you don't want to identify. And yet, it's precious. In this house, it's your wand, your baton, your sword. You've used it to stir porridge break ice in the water bucket, swat away, hens chase goats out of the doorway, hush children threaten men, subtly point out flaws in a wall, knock dust off beams, and on one memorable occasion, squash a very bold rat. One object, many functions. The medieval peasant household didn't come with drawers full of gadgets. You didn't have specialized utensils. You had what you had. And what you had better work hard. Historical fact for tonight. The average medieval peasant household owned very few utensils. A pot or two, maybe a knife, a pan, and often one communal spoon. Wood was cheaper and easier to carve than metal, so many spoons were made at home. They weren't delicate. They were durable, multi-purpose, and passed down generations like silverware in wealthier homes. And they left marks. Literal ones if you were a child with poor table manners. No, it's not your preferred method of parenting. But when the baby upends the barley, the toddler bites the chicken, and the older one calls the reeve a cabbage-brained lout, you do what you must. The spoon helps. It also helps settle disputes between siblings. You wave it like a scepter, declare one guilty of muck-tracking, and demand 10 minutes of silent penance. They don't obey, of course. But they laugh, and that's something. Your husband once joked that you loved the spoon more than him. You didn't answer, because the spoon doesn't forget birthdays, or leave its socks by the fire, or explain that actually the barn door is fine and you're just being dramatic. The spoon listens, it waits, and when no one else is looking, you rest your chin on its handle and sigh. The spoon understands. Academic debate continues about how women in medieval homes expressed agency, especially in environments where ownership speech and decision-making were limited. Some scholars argue tools and domestic objects were extensions of authority even when formal power wasn't granted. A spoon then might be more than a spoon. You feel this deeply. Sometimes holding it makes you feel steadier, like your hands still know what to do, even when your head is full of fog, and your back has opinions about yesterday's wood chopping. It's strange what becomes a comfort. Not a necklace, not a keepsake, not a poem tucked under your pillow, but a spoon. You've thought about replacing it. A new one would be smoother, lighter, maybe even better balanced. But then, who are you kidding? You'd still reach for this one, because this spoon has seen things. It's been there through burnt broth, sick children, sudden storms, and quiet nights when everyone else slept, and you just sat the spoon across your lap like a sleeping dog. It's the first thing you grab when you feel overwhelmed, and the last thing you wash before bed. Sometimes at market, you see the other women carrying theirs, tucked into their belts like daggers. You nod at each other knowingly. You don't speak of it, but you all understand. A wooden spoon is a burden and a badge. So tonight, as the fire crackles and the stew starts to bubble, you hold the spoon a little tighter. Not because you expect trouble, but because the quiet moments matter too. Because this isn't just survival, it's orchestration. And every conductor needs a baton. It's market day, which means, of course, chaos. The kind of chaos that smells like wet wool, garlic, and ambition. You wake earlier than usual, though. Wake is generous, considering you barely slept. You bundle onions, eggs, a bundle of herbs that may or may not be parsley, and your dignity into a threadbare sack. The road to town is more puddle than path. Your shoes, if you can call them that, do nothing to stop the squelch. You try to walk the edge, but then remember last week's goat dung incident and step directly in instead. Safer. By the time you arrive, your hem is soaked. Your basket is tilting to the left, and you've already cursed the wind twice under your breath. The market greets you like an unruly choir bells, clanging pigs, squealing vendors shouting deals they probably invented on the spot. There's music too. Someone with a lute who knows 3 chords and has the confidence of a minstrel twice his age. You find your corner. It's between the tanner, who always smells like regret, and the old woman who sells radishes and unsolicited advice. You spread your goods, straighten your back, and smile. That's half the trade, really, the smiling. You've learned to trade not just eggs, but charm. One raised eyebrow buys you an extra turnip. A well-placed sigh might knock a penny off the price of cheese. You're not just a peasant woman today. You're a negotiator, a diplomat, a magician, turning barley into butter and gossip into gold. Historical fact. In many medieval towns, markets were central to community life. For peasant women, these days were one of the few public spheres where they could act with relative independence. Many sold surplus produce, spun goods, or dairy, negotiating prices and navigating complex barter systems, especially where currency was scarce. It's not glamorous, but it's power. A different kind. You spot a familiar face, the miller's wife. She eyes your onions and raises her brows. You nod. The trade is silent, but efficient. You give her 3. She gives you 2 leeks and a rumor. Apparently the blacksmith's niece is pregnant. Again. You pretend to be shocked. You're not. But acting surprised gets you a handful of dried beans. Today's win. Then there's the butcher. His stall is always busy. You inch closer, hoping for a scrap of fat or a bone for broth. He gives you a sliver of bacon, barely worth the mud on your skirt. Still, you thank him with exaggerated politeness. You notice something missing. The small sack of dried herbs you tucked in the corner of your basket gone. You look around. No sign. Just a boy slipping through the crowd with suspicious speed. You sigh. Mild theft. It's part of the rhythm here. You've done it yourself years ago, before the children and the arthritis. Academic debate. Oh yes, scholars still argue whether medieval market thefts were acts of desperation or quiet rebellion. Some say the market was a place of hidden resistance where peasants tested the boundaries of property and power. Others say, sometimes people just get hungry. You stay until noon long enough for the sun to steam the puddles and for your onions to wilt. You've traded most of your goods for things that look slightly less edible, but will last longer. You pocket a small wedge of cheese, a roll of coarse thread, and blessedly, a piece of soap. Someone is preaching at the fountain again. Something about the sins of vanity and the dangers of laughing too much. You keep walking. You take the long road home. The path that passes through the woods, where no one asks why your basket is lighter than it should be. You allow yourself a tiny nibble of the cheese, sharp, crumbly, perfect. For a moment, the ache in your back fades. You think of all the women in the market bartering, pretending surviving. You think of how many of them smiled through missing teeth, bruised pride, and aching feet. You smile too. Because today, you didn't come home empty-handed. And that's worth something. You blink slowly, not because you're tired, though you are, but because blinking is the only moment your eyes get to close. The sun has climbed high enough to make you sweat, but not high enough to justify stopping. The market is behind you, the chores are ahead of you, and in between lies a window of temptation that goes by one name: nap. You don't say the word aloud, of course. It's dangerous, like whispering feast or coin. It might summon someone in need of a favor. You shuffle back through the village with your sack of bartered odds and ends. A cheese rind, a loop of thread, a story about the tanner's daughter that you're not sure is true, but you'll pass it on anyway. That's just neighborly. At your door, the heat hits you differently. Inside the house smells like boiled wool and ash. Outside, it smells like sun-warmed mud and distant manure. You stand in the doorway and weigh your options. You could sit, just for a moment. You do. You perch on the bench, still holding your basket as if pretending you're not resting will make it acceptable. You stare ahead, not really seeing anything. Your fingers are sticky with cheese. Your feet are beginning to swell in your shoes. You try not to think about how long it's been since you last washed your socks, or whether they're even yours. You lean back just a little. The breeze from the cracked window is soft. The hens outside are murmuring to one another in low, judgmental clucks. You feel your shoulders drop. Your body is doing something rebellious, relaxing. A nap. A single, glorious, possibly illegal nap. Historical fact. Though medieval life was grueling, many rural laborers did take short midday rests, particularly during long agricultural seasons. The term noon meat even referred to a small break for food and rest. But for women, especially those managing households, any rest was usually interrupted by someone needing something, or everything, which is precisely what happens. Because the moment your eyes close and your soul lifts just an inch toward unconsciousness, you hear it. A crash. Then, mother, you know that tone. It's the one that means either someone is bleeding or someone is lying about someone else bleeding. You sigh, heavily. Your brief flirtation with sleep ends with a wince as you rise. You find 2 children. One is holding a chicken, upside down. The other is crying, possibly because she was pecked, possibly because her doll fell in the privy. Again, you respond with the grace of someone who expected worse. You take the chicken, soothe the child, and try to remember if you've eaten. You haven't. You dig through the basket break off the smallest corner of bread and chew slowly, as if time will stretch with it. It doesn't. Quirky detail. Here it is. Some medieval women chewed willow bark for pain relief or to stay alert. You've never tried it, but you did once chew a piece of birch bark because you were bored. It tasted like desperation. You consider lying down again. You consider hiding behind the woodshed. You even consider faking a fainting spell just for 10 minutes of silence. But you don't. Because there's laundry to rinse and a pot to stir. There's a toddler who seems to be trying to lick the wall. There's a husband who will ask gently but loudly if his second-best tunic is dry. As if you've spent the day lounging in rose petals. You glance longingly at your bed, or more accurately, the pile of hay you call a bed. You think of closing your eyes again, but instead, you pick up the broom. Not to sweep, just to appear occupied, because nothing invites unsolicited tasks like looking peaceful. Academic debate. Some historians argue medieval peasants were more well-rested than we imagine, pointing to seasonal rhythms and winter lulls in labor. Others argue that women's domestic burdens erased any chance of consistent rest, even when physical fieldwork was light. You know where you stand. You haven't sat down in hours. You step outside. The sun has shifted. Shadows stretch long across the path. You take a breath. The air is warm, dry, and faintly sweet with crushed herbs and dirt. You tuck your hair back under your cap and press your back against the doorframe. Just 5 minutes. Just this moment. Just stillness. But from around the corner, someone calls your name. Of course they do. You straighten your spine. You wave. You sigh so deeply, your bones join in. And you get back to work. Because naps are dreams. And dreams don't feed chickens. The needle is small, but your hands feel clumsy. You hold the shirt up to the light, or what little of it peeks through the crooked window. Another hole, right at the elbow. Again, you thread the bone needle with a strip of coarse, uneven thread you salvaged from an older garment last week. Because in your world, nothing is wasted. Not linen. Not time. Not even silence. Your knees creak as you sit down, though sit is generous. It's more of a controlled fall onto a wobbly stool, which groans in protest as if it too is tired of holding everything up. You press the torn cloth into your lap, pull the thread tight, and begin the familiar rhythm, up through down tug. Your fingers are rough, the pads calloused. You've stitched so many seams, they seem to stitch back into your mind. Your thoughts wander while your hands work. This one is your son's tunic, the same one he insists on wearing, even though it's outgrown, outlived, and outrageously torn. Still, he says it's lucky. You don't believe in luck, but you do believe in routines. And this one is yours, mending the same places again and again, as though the world could be kept together if you just pull the right thread tight enough. Outside, someone yells at a goose. Inside, someone sneezes twice in a row. You keep sewing. Historical fact. Most peasant women were responsible not just for making garments from scratch, spinning wool, weaving, cutting, and stitching, but also endlessly repairing them. Fabric was precious. Clothes were few. Some families passed garments down through several siblings' generations and even borrowed across households when needed. And so, you don't just mend sleeves. You mend cuffs, hems underarms. You patch knees and elbows, restitch tiers, in wool cloaks. You turn worn collars inside out to hide fraying a little trick you learned from your mother who learned it from hers. The fence can wait, but it doesn't. Because as you pull the final knot tight on the sleeve and bite off the thread with your teeth, you hear it a crash, a thud, a sheepish bleat. You rise again and head outside, basket in hand, only to find the goat. That goat. She's made it halfway through the fence again, head on one side, body stuck in the middle, like she's forgotten how being a goat works. You pull. She resists. You push. She sneezes in your face. Eventually she's free, and you inspect the splintered fence rail. Again. You mutter under your breath in a language made entirely of exhaustion. The fence will need mending. Again. You fetch the twine, the hammer, the same piece of wood you've reused 3 times now. A proper repair would require fresh timber, but fresh timber requires money, which requires miracles. So you make do. You always do. Quirky detail. In some areas, peasants stuffed worn-out clothes with hay to provide extra padding during cold seasons. Once during a particularly bitter winter, you stuffed a child's shirt with feathers. It worked, but they molted for a week. Back inside, another hole awaits. This time, it's a sock, or rather, what used to be one. It's less sock now, more decorative ankle string. You sigh, slide the darning mushroom into place, and begin again. Academic debate. Historians often discuss the so-called invisibility of domestic labor. While men's work plowing, thatching, trading was visible and recorded, women's work was taken for granted. The mending, nursing, baking, and maintaining of everything that kept the home from falling into chaos, it was assumed, not acknowledged. Is it really labor if no one sees it? You think it is. Your spine agrees. You shift, stretch, feel something pop in your lower back. You remember sitting down this morning, but you don't remember how long it lasted. You look around. Every surface bears the marks of your work. Every day is another stitch in a never-ending tapestry that no one else sees. You get up again. There are turnips to wash, a child to comfort, a pot that has boiled too long, a seam that is split. You do what you always do. You fix what's broken patch, what's worn, soothe what's restless. You mend, but not yourself. You don't have time for that. Maybe tonight, you tell yourself. Maybe after everyone is fed. Maybe after the last fire dies. Maybe when no one is watching. Maybe. The goat is glaring at you again. You're not sure what you did. Possibly nothing. Possibly everything. But she's staring with that unsettling sideways intensity only goats can summon. She's halfway through nibbling your broom. Again. You take a deep breath. Not because it helps, but because the alternatives, shouting, stomping, hiding under the hay, aren't productive. And because today, once again, you are not just a peasant woman. You are also the village peacemaker, dispute diffuser, goat whisperer, and occasional referee. Inside, your children are bickering about who gets the larger bread crust. Outside, your neighbor is yelling about how your chicken allegedly trespassed into her garden and frightened her cabbages. Again, you step between the children. With one eyebrow and a look that could curdle cream, you end the fight, at least temporarily. Then you offer your neighbor the most diplomatic combination of nodding, sympathetic sighs and vague promises to look into it. You suspect the chicken did it. You suspect she's proud. Historical fact. In small medieval villages, particularly manorial communities, conflict resolution often happened informally. Women were regularly expected to mediate domestic disputes, gossip-fueled spats, or minor boundary arguments, especially when the men were away drunk or uninterested. And you've become quite good at it. You've learned that nothing calms an angry neighbor like a loaf of still warm bread, that nothing cools a sibling squabble faster than the promise of a story told by firelight, that goats can be soothed by rubbing behind the ears unless they're plotting something, in which case may God have mercy. Today is one of those days. The fence you repaired yesterday, broken. The child who promised to sweep the hearth, gone. Last seen chasing the goose with a stick and a wild expression. The neighbor who borrowed your ladle 2 weeks ago returned it, bent. You don't ask how. You are in all ways managing chaos with grace, or at least a sort of tired dignity. You quietly fix the fence again. You mop up the spilled broth no one admits to spilling. You replace the straw mattress that the toddler peed on. Again. You retrieve your broom from the goat. Quirky detail. Some peasant families would designate one child as the runner, someone responsible for fetching gossip, calming tensions, or literally running messages between squabbling relatives. You suspect your youngest has been fulfilling this role behind your back, trading whispered secrets for slices of cheese. And now, the village boys are arguing again. This time, it's about whose turn it is to carry the water barrel. You step in before someone gets hit with a bucket. You gently redirect the energy. Praise one, distract the other. Promise something sweet if they both behave. A sliver of dried apple can work wonders when wielded with the right tone. But your peacekeeping isn't just for the home. At the communal oven, you listen to two women whisper complaints about their husbands without judgment. Just soft mm-hms and raised brows that invite confession. At the well, you settle a debate about whose turn it is to draw water first. You don't have a title or badge or official power, but they listen. Because you've earned it one kind word at a time, one repaired friendship at a time. Academic debate. Scholars have long argued whether medieval women had social power in peasant society. While they lacked formal authority, they often held informal influence, especially through relationships, reputation, and emotional labor. You think that's true? You've seen how a quiet word from you can stop a shouting match, how the tone of your voice can calm a tense moment faster than any priest's sermon. It's not official, but it works. Evening comes, and you breathe just once. The fire crackles. Children sleep. The goat is chewing something again. You sigh, and you keep the peace, because someone must. And tonight, like every night, that someone is you. The sun today is pretending to be generous. It casts a pale light on the thatched rooftops, warms your sleeves just enough to make you think it's not time to panic. But you know better. You've lived through enough autumns to recognize the signs. The soft urgency in the wind. The way birds start flying in anxious spirals. The way your joints creak just a little louder in the morning. And of course, the quiet dread that tiptoes behind every chore whispering winter is coming, and it's hungry. You run your fingers through the last of the onions hanging in the rafters. You count sacks of grain that aren't as full as you hoped. You inspect the salted meat and sigh because you can already hear the complaints when it's all you'll have for weeks. The garden, once so green and unruly, now sags into itself, browning and quiet. You dig up the last carrots, brushing off dirt like it's gold dust. They're stunted, but they're yours. Historical fact. In medieval Europe, the months leading up to winter brought a survival-focused mindset. Peasant women were responsible for preserving food through salting, drying, smoking, pickling, and hoping it lasted. Running out wasn't inconvenient. It was fatal. You shuffle through the shed, checking the firewood pile. Too low. Of course, it's always too low. And yet your back already remembers the ache from chopping. And your arms still hum with the weight of the last bundle you dragged home through frostbitten mud. So today, you gather more. Sticks kindling logs stolen from the forest's edge while pretending not to see the Reeves house. Technically illegal, but then again, so is freezing to death. The children are helping. In theory. One is braiding grass. Another is chasing a squirrel with a sack. You don't ask. You just call them in when the light begins to fade and the cold creeps into your boots. Quirky detail. Some families hung goose fat on a string to lick during the worst winter weeks, a strange protein-rich substitute when all else was gone. You haven't done that. Yet. But the goose is starting to look nervous. Inside, you run your hands over the stored herbs, measuring not just quantity, but comfort. Chamomile for calm. Nettle for aches. Yarrow for bleeding. A little mugwort for dreams. There's not enough of any of it. You sit by the fire and rub warmth into your hands. The stew tonight is thinner than you'd like, and the bread didn't rise. But it's food. And food in late October is no longer a given. It's a tally. Academic debate. Historians continue to debate the extent to which peasant women's survival labor shaped the rhythm of medieval rural life. Was it purely economic necessity, or a kind of quiet, practical power? You lean toward the second. You know who made winter survivable. And it wasn't the Lord in his hall. You place another log on the fire. You check the windows for drafts. You fold more cloth into more layers, because warmth is often just strategy. Tomorrow, if the frost holds, you'll have to decide whether to dry the last apples or eat them now. Tomorrow, you'll barter for a candle stub. Tomorrow, you'll dream of spring. But tonight you've done what you can. The beds are padded. The pantry is sealed. The children are warm, if not clean. And your breath fogs the air in quiet little ghosts. Winter is coming, and you are, as always, almost ready. You've made it to that soft, dangerous hour, the one just after the work is done, but before the rest begins. If you sit too long, your joints will lock. If you lie down now, you might not get back up until sunrise. But the ache makes you want to risk it. Your feet throb in slow pulses, as if keeping time with your headache. You kick off your shoes, if you can call them that, more scraps than structure, and rub your soles. Calluses meet your thumbs, like bark under bark. You don't remember the last time your feet felt smooth. You don't remember the last time you sat without something in your hands. The hearth glows low now. Red coals hum their slow lullaby, a warmth that doesn't quite reach the corners of the room. Still, it's enough. Enough to let your shoulders fall finally. Enough to let your eyes linger half closed, not from sleep, but from the sheer relief of not doing. Historical fact. In medieval households, evenings were often the only time women could stop moving, and even then, the work rarely ceased. Spinning, mending, and food prep for the next day filled what modern people might call free time. The concept didn't exist the way we think of it now. You can hear the quiet scuffle of the youngest child kicking in her sleep. A chicken rustles. Someone coughs. Your husband mutters something incoherent from his corner, possibly dreaming of barley. The room is never silent. You've accepted that. You've even made peace with it. But tonight, there's something heavier in the air. Something still. Maybe it's the ache in your temples blooming like slow thunder. Maybe it's the way your knees crack when you shift. Or maybe it's the quiet thought you keep avoiding. You're tired. Not tired like today was long. Tired like many days have been long for many years. You pick up your spindle because that's what your hands know to do and begin to spin thread. The whir of wool helps settle your thoughts. Thread is like time, thin, fragile, and best handled gently. Quirky detail. Some women used to murmur their prayers into their spinning thread, believing their words would be woven into cloth and worn like blessings. You never learned the prayers, but sometimes your breath slips out with the rhythm anyway. You glance at the door. It's barred. You glance at the fire, still alive. You glance at the ceiling, which is still leaking in the corner, even though it hasn't rained in days. Everything is as it should be. And yet, your body doesn't believe you. The pain behind your eyes is familiar, like an old, uninvited friend. The type of ache that suggests maybe it wasn't the smoke, or the sun, or the stooping. Maybe it's all of them. Academic debate. Some scholars argue that the constant physical pain endured by medieval peasants, especially women, was so normalized it became invisible in historical records. Others suggest that the very absence of complaint in sources is itself proof of how deeply hardship was woven into daily expectation. Either way, your back doesn't need a footnote. It just needs a warm stone and a moment's peace. You set down the spindle. Stretch your fingers. Rub the crick in your neck that's been growing since before the midday meal. You don't bother lighting another candle. The fire is enough. You don't bother changing into anything else. Your body is already wrapped in the day. You kneel not for prayer, but because it's the easiest way to reach the floor. Still, your lips move almost from memory. A thanks. Not loud, not certain, but something. Thank you for surviving. Thank you that the bread didn't burn. Thank you that the child didn't cough blood. Thank you that the goats didn't escape today. It's not gratitude exactly. It's ritual. A soft hum at the end of the day's storm. You curl onto the straw pallet already half warm from the weight of someone else. The blanket itches. The pillow is more sack than cushion. But your eyes are closing. Not because you're ready, but because you're done. And that, in your world, is enough. It begins, as most betrayals do, with a small, inconvenient ache. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to slow you down when you're already behind. You wake feeling fogged over, not just tired, tilted. The kind of fatigue that lives somewhere between your ribs and your thoughts. Outside, a rooster crows as if the world hasn't changed, but your body says otherwise. The bread you meant to bake is still dough. The bucket for the well feels heavier than it did yesterday, and your hands, they move but sluggishly, like they've forgotten their own shortcuts. This isn't the luxury of illness. No one brings broth or soft words when a peasant woman doesn't feel well. You still tend the fire, still wring out the laundry, still chase the child trying to feed oats to the cat. Historical fact. In medieval Europe, the rhythm of life was dictated by necessity, not health. Unless you were visibly dying, work came first, especially for women whose labor often went unseen, even when it was essential. You think perhaps you're catching something, but you've learned not to say it aloud, because once it's said, someone might offer advice. And medieval advice, especially from old neighbors, is a strange potion indeed. Rub a live eel on your chest, one once told you. For lung pains, she insisted. Another swore by warmed nettle tea brewed during a full moon. You nodded. You smiled. You made regular tea and hoped no one noticed the lack of moon water. Quirky detail. Some women kept pouches of dried toads or earthworms tied to their belts as protective charms against fevers. You don't, but the old woman across the stream does, and she hasn't sneezed in years. The real problem, though, isn't illness, it's timing. You feel the slow warning in your belly pressure heat and the unmistakable churn that says your period is coming. Not today, you think. Not with 3 baskets of barley to sort. Not with market day around the corner. Not with everything already teetering on your fraying edge. But nature doesn't ask for your schedule. Academic debate. Scholars still debate how often medieval women menstruated compared to today. With constant pregnancies, extended breastfeeding, and poorer nutrition cycles were often irregular or delayed. But when they came with no ibuprofen, no pads, and absolutely no privacy. You grab the cloth. It's one of your better ones, meaning it doesn't scratch like bramble. You fold it, pin it as best you can, and continue as if your insides aren't staging a revolt. You walk slower today. Sit when no one's looking. Avoid the smoke from the fire, which always makes the nausea worse. And still, no one asks. That's the thing, isn't it? Women around? You know. They know the lean, the grimace, the pressing of a hand to hip. They've felt the same slow war. But you don't speak of it, not really. Instead, someone hands you a basket and says, "You look pale. Eat a turnip." You nod. You eat the turnip. It does nothing, of course. By afternoon, you're doubled over, trying to sort barley sweat, soaking the collar of your tunic. The child wants a story. The goat wants to eat your sleeve. And you just want the earth to stop spinning for a moment. You consider lying down. But lying down isn't safe. It invites judgment, even from yourself. So you stand, you stretch, and you hum. It's a little tune your mother used to hum when the world pressed in. There's comfort in knowing your mother had days like this too, and her mother before her, and hers before that. Women have been bleeding in silence longer than books have been written about kings. Evening comes, like molasses, slow, dark, and clinging. Your back feels like it's filled with stones. Your lower belly pulses in slow, hateful rhythm. But the barley is sorted. The soup is stirred. And the house, if not clean, is at least no worse than yesterday. That you decide is a victory. You curl into your scratchy blanket cloth, still awkward beneath you body, still warring with itself. And just before sleep takes you, you whisper, not quite a prayer, not quite a complaint. Maybe tomorrow, the bleeding will end. You don't smell yourself, not really, not anymore. Your nose gave up somewhere between the smoke, the onions, and that 1 month when the cow got into the pantry and no one spoke of it again. But tonight there's a chance. The house is still. The chores are not done, but paused. The baby is asleep. The men are elsewhere. The goat has finally accepted its fate, so you slip quietly to the basin near the hearth. It's not much, just a battered bucket lukewarm water that's already a little cloudy, and a bit of soap that smells vaguely of ash and last year's herbs. But it's yours for now, and that, in this life, is rare. You unlace your overdress. You roll your sleeves. You dip a cloth in water and press it to your face, your neck, your arms. It's not a bath. It's barely a rinse, but it feels like coming back into your own skin. Historical fact. Bathing in medieval Europe varied widely by region and class. Contrary to popular belief, people did wash, but not every day, and not usually with full immersion. A peasant woman might bathe a few times a month more if she lived near clean water, less if firewood and privacy were scarce. You glance over your shoulder, always listening. Privacy is a luxury you never learned to relax into. A creak of the beams could mean someone waking. A breeze through the door could carry a voice that reminds you that even washing can be watched, judged, or whispered about later. You've learned to be fast, quiet, efficient. There's no time for soaking. You wipe your feet, your underarms, the places that chafe. You scrub behind your ears like your grandmother used to scold you to do. You even dare a quick rinse of your hair, though drying it will take half the night and most of the fire's patience. Quirky detail. In some villages, women use cheesecloth steeped in vinegar or elderflower as a rinse to sweeten the skin. Whether it worked or not, the idea of perfuming yourself with salad dressing feels almost luxurious compared to just less muddy than before. You find the little scrap of linen you hide in the wall crevice. It's dry mostly. You use it to dab your face. Soft, worn thin from 100 nights like this. It's a secret indulgence, a towel of sorts, but more like a whisper of softness in a world of scratchy wool and shared everything. Academic debate. Scholars still argue over how common bathing truly was for peasants. Some argue that the decline of public bathhouses due to plague fears and moral reform made washing rare by the late Middle Ages. Others point to laws mandating clean hands before market or church as evidence that washing, however modest, was expected, even for the poor. You light a sliver of tallow to see yourself in a bowl of water. Not a mirror, those are for nobility, just water's shimmer. Your reflection is blurred soft, but it's you. And for a moment, you see yourself not as a servant of everyone else's comfort, but a person, a woman. Tired, yes. Worn, yes. But still here. Your body aches from the bending, the lifting, the constant bracing. But tonight, it's clean. Not cathedral clean, not saint clean, but cleaner than you were this morning. And in your world, that's a small miracle. You wring out the cloth and hang it by the hearth. It will smell of smoke. But then again, everything does. You pull your shift back over your head, tuck your hair under its wrap, and settle down beside the warmest part of the stones. You don't speak. You don't need to. This washing, this stolen moment, is a language all its own. A language of care without cost, of dignity without audience, of survival with softness. Tomorrow, it'll be back to grime and grease and goat droppings. But tonight, you smell like elderflower, and your fingernails are clean. And for the first time in days, you feel more human than husk. You lie down again in your straw and wool and fading heat. The cloth cools on the back of your neck like a blessing, and just before sleep folds you into its gentle arms. You murmur, "At least for tonight, I got to be clean." You lie there, not quite asleep. Your body is more than ready, your limbs heavy with fatigue. your back flat against the straw mattress that feels tonight slightly less lumpy than usual. But your ears are wide awake. They have no choice, because someone is snoring. Not loudly, not alarmingly, just enough to make it impossible to fall asleep without first considering smothering someone with a wool blanket. Just for a moment, lovingly, the sound drifts across the darkness of your one-room home. It's rhythmic, stubborn, oddly musical. You've named it in your head the Snore Sonata in low G. It's probably your husband, or the eldest child, or the dog, which somehow sleeps on the best part of the blanket, despite contributing nothing to the household economy. You exhale slowly, staring at the rafters overhead. Outside, a breeze brushes past the shuttered window. You hear the low murmur of pigs shifting in their pen, and somewhere in the distance, an owl asks a question no one wants to answer. Night in the village is not quiet. It's just a different kind of noisy. Historical fact. In most peasant homes, families shared one room for living, eating, and sleeping. Beds, if they existed, were shared by multiple family members, sometimes even animals in colder months. Privacy as we understand it today was a luxury peasants rarely tasted. You shift slightly and are rewarded with the creak of a wooden frame. You freeze, not wanting to wake the baby or the goat. You're never quite sure which one is harder to settle. The snore continues relentless. It's joined now by the soft grinding of someone's teeth and a cough that has haunted your middle child every third night since Lent. You stare up at the ceiling again and wonder what life would be like with a room of your own. Not a castle, not even a cottage. Just a space where your dreams wouldn't have to compete with someone else's sleep sounds. You once heard of a noblewoman who had her own chamber, her own bed, her own bath even. It sounded decadent, unreal, like something from a saint's vision or a baker's lie. Quirky detail. Some wealthier homes featured sleeping benches built into kitchen hearths or corners of warm rooms, while poorer families often wrapped themselves in shared cloaks or slept on rush-strewn floors. Beds stuffed with feathers were rare. Most were filled with straw moss or old rags, and flea bites were simply part of life. Your mind starts drifting again, not quite asleep, not quite thinking. You wonder how long until the fire goes out. You wonder whether the pot by the hearth will still have enough porridge for the morning. You wonder whether anyone will remember the clean cloth you tucked behind the beam to keep it safe dry in yours. Academic debate. Scholars have long discussed the concept of segmented sleep in the medieval period. Evidence suggests people may have commonly had two phases of sleep, one in the early evening, followed by a waking period in the middle of the night, and a second sleep until dawn. During that waking window, people prayed, whispered thought, or even worked. You mostly stare at the ceiling and count snorts. You roll onto your side, wrapping your arm around a bundle of spare fabric that pretends to be a pillow. You tug the blanket up over your ears not for warmth, but to block the world out. It doesn't work. You can still hear breathing, shifting the occasional cluck from the chicken who refuses to sleep outside like a proper bird. But your eyes grow heavy. Your muscles sag with gratitude. You can almost pretend you're floating weightless and soft. You allow your thoughts to wander, not to chores, not to hunger, not even to mourning. You picture a meadow, a sky, something clean and distant and undemanding. And still behind it, all the snore continues. Reliable, unapologetic, infuriating, strangely comforting, because for all its irritation, it means you're not alone. It means they survived another day, just like you did. It means life in all its noisy stubbornness is still going. And with that, you finally give in. Sleep finds you not all at once, but gradually, like water rising in a basin. And just before the surface closes over your thoughts, you whisper, "Snore all you want. I'll dream louder." The darkness is no longer quiet, it's heavy, not because it's loud, but because it has settled over the house like a second blanket, thick and unmoving. The embers in the hearth are barely glowing now, a soft red sigh beneath a dome of ash. You lie curled around yourself, tucked in, among the same straw you woke in scratchy, uneven home. The smoke still clings to everything. Your hair smells of it, your clothes taste of it, and your throat carries a roughness that no well water could wash away. The house always smells this way at night, of wood and wool, of earth and effort, but there's also warmth. Not the heat of summer, nor the glow of firelight, just the quiet heat that bodies make when they're stacked like bundled kindling on a cold night. Your children are strewn across the floor, like spilled grain sacks. The dog is in your armpit, and someone's foot, possibly yours, is tangled in the hem of a tunic that belongs to no one anymore. Historical fact: straw-stuffed mattresses were common among the peasantry, though they required regular turning to avoid rot and vermin. These makeshift beds were shared by entire households and often laid directly on the floorboards, which themselves weren't entirely sealed from wind or wildlife. You listen to the familiar night noises, the faint whimper of a child dreaming, a mouse nibbling in the thatch, the wind slipping through a loose plank, and your own heart thudding its tired rhythm beneath your shift. The day has not been easy. They never are. But you've done what needed doing. Even the things no one noticed, especially those. The unspoken victories of the day pile up invisibly like kindling tucked into corners, a tear mended in silence, a pot stirred without complaint, a sibling quarrel extinguished with a look, a meal made from what little was left. And yes, you are still here. That in itself feels like a triumph. Quirky detail. Some women in the medieval period believed that placing lavender under the straw mattress helped with sleep and kept insects away. Of course, most couldn't afford lavender, so they made do with moss thyme or a few prayers muttered into the folds of a wool blanket. Your mind drifts as you stare into the dim. You think of the things you didn't get to today, the thread you meant to wind, the thatch you meant to patch, the apology you meant to give but swallowed down because the bread was burning and there wasn't time. You tell yourself you'll do better tomorrow, even though tomorrow will begin exactly as today did, in darkness, with soot in your throat, and a fire that resists your every effort. Academic debate. There is growing discussion among medievalists about the degree to which women's invisible labor shaped peasant life. Though underrepresented in records, women's maintenance of the home livestock and social fabric likely constituted the backbone of rural survival. Without it, the village itself might have crumbled, though no one thought to thank them. Your eyes grow heavy, but not because you've had enough sleep. Because sleep is the only place where the work can't follow. At least not always. And as you feel yourself slide back into the same straw, you emerge from the same smoke, you cough through the same fatigue that never quite lifts, you find a strange comfort. The day has folded in on itself. It ends where it began. Not with fanfare, not with rest, but with presence. Your presence. You still breathing, still listening, still stubbornly alive, and that somehow feels like enough. You've made it to the end of the day. Not just any day, but the kind woven from cold floors, warm chores, sharp corners, and soft silences. You didn't have a name in the record books. No statues, no scrolls, no songs written in your honor. But history was built on your back, quietly, patiently, without applause. The straw under your spine is poking through again. Your knees still ache from kneeling, and your hands never quite forget the weight of the pot, or the thread, or the child. But you lie there now, in that hush that comes just before sleep, knowing deep down that your existence mattered. Not because it was grand, but because it endured. You carried water, and burdens stirred soup, and stories stitched clothes and kin. You kept the fire going in more ways than one. And though the world outside rarely noticed, your corner of it survived because of you. So now, let your shoulders soften. Let your breath slow. Let the walls fade, and the straw quiet, and the memories sink gently into dreams. The night is long, but not cruel. Not tonight. Tonight the world asks nothing more of you. No lifting, no waiting, no wondering. Only rest. Because you've done enough, dear one. You've done more than enough. That's the story. For tonight may your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.